So let's dive into a really fascinating story of transformation. We're going to explore how one of the world's most ancient faiths had to grapple with the explosive changes of the modern era. This is the story of how Judaism reinvented itself, leading to the diverse movements we see today. And that's really the big question here, isn't it? When the walls of the old world started crumbling, what did it even mean to be Jewish anymore? Could tradition really coexist with reason? Could community coexist with citizenship? This tension? Well, it set the stage for a profound internal debate that's still going on. You see, before the 18th century, Jewish life across Europe was largely self-contained. It was governed by its own laws and traditions, kind of separate from the world around it. But then came the Enlightenment, this wave of thinking that championed reason, individual rights, and universal human values. And this new way of seeing the world, it challenged absolutely everything. Well, in response, a movement called the Haskalah, or the Jewish Enlightenment, started to bubble up. Its leaders, they were called the Moskalim, and they argued that Jews could and really should participate fully in modern society. They pushed for secular education, speaking the local language. It was this incredibly delicate balancing act of trying to refashion Judaism for a rational world, but without losing its soul. This quote from the French Revolution, wow, it just perfectly sums up the New Deal that was on the table. Jews could get equal rights as citizens, sure, but only if they gave up their identity as a separate, autonomous nation. The price of admission into modern society was basically a reinvention of what it meant to be a Jew. So the first major organized answer to this massive challenge was the Reform movement. And we're not talking about a minor tweak here. This was a radical reimagination of Judaism, and it was all driven by this desire to keep Jews from just completely assimilating and disappearing. Okay, so what's really interesting here is just how big these changes were. The early reformers argued that the core of Judaism was its ethical monotheism. Think of it like a tree, right? They saw the ethics as the roots and the trunk, but all the ancient rituals, well, those were just branches that could be pruned. They saw Jewish history as this living, evolving thing, so they felt totally justified in adapting it for their time. And this meant individual choice, autonomy, became the most important thing, making Judaism a personal faith instead of just a set of mandatory rules for the community. Now, you can probably guess, right? These radical changes were not exactly welcomed by everyone. In fact, in direct response to the Reform movement, a new, self-conscious defense of tradition rose up: orthodoxy. And this is a really crucial point. Orthodoxy wasn't just the old way continuing on autopilot. Nope. It was a modern movement in its own right, actively and intellectually arguing why tradition had to be preserved against these new challenges. It was organized, it was smart, and it was defiant. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Even inside this traditionalist camp, two very different paths emerged. On one side, you have modern orthodoxy. Their philosophy is Torah with the way of the land. The idea is you can be totally engaged in modern life, science, art, business, you name it, while still strictly observing Jewish law. But on the other side, you've got Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, which basically argues that modern society is a threat. They say it needs to be kept at a distance, and they advocate for separation to protect traditional Jewish life. So you've got this radical adaptation from Reform on one side, and this staunch preservation from Orthodoxy on the other. Was there anything in the middle? Absolutely. A third way developed, conservative Judaism, which was all about finding a balance between tradition and change. Okay, to really get what the conservative movement is all about, we've got to talk about one key concept: halacha, or Jewish law. This is the huge collection of rules and practices that governs daily life. And for conservative Judaism, what you do with halacha is everything. So here's their core idea, and it's brilliant. They see Jewish law, halacha, as a flowing, continuous river. It's binding, which means, unlike for Reform Jews, you can't just step out of it. But, and this is the key part, it also evolves through history, unlike the Orthodox view of a static, unchanging body of water. This positive historical approach means the law has to be honored, but it also means rabbis can carefully channel and adapt its flow to fit new situations. Okay, so we have these three major movements, all with really different approaches. But what's the deep down root cause of their disagreement? It all comes down to one core theological concept: revelation. Specifically, it's about what exactly happened when God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai. I mean, seriously, how you answer that one question pretty much determines everything else. And this right here, this shows you the split perfectly. The Orthodox view holds to something called the twofold revelation, that God revealed both the written text of the Torah and the oral law for how to interpret it directly to Moses. That means the law is divine, it's perfect, it's eternal. Rabbis don't change it, they just uncover what was already there. The conservative view, on the other hand, sees the Torah as a human record of that divine human encounter. So yes, it contains God's will, but it's expressed through human language and understanding. To put it another way, a great thinker named Abraham Joshua Heschel argued, the Bible itself is a kind of midrash. It's humanity's best shot at capturing and interpreting a divine event that is just beyond words. And because it has that human component, it can be studied historically. And that is what gives future rabbis the authority to keep interpreting and adapting it. That is the fundamental split. So you might think all this clashing and disagreement would break Judaism, right? But it didn't. Instead, it created this dynamic, passionate, and pluralistic conversation about the best way to live a meaningful Jewish life in the modern age. Just take a look at this synagogue in Malmö, Sweden. It was built in 1903. This is what that whole debate we've been talking about looks like in brick and mortar. It's a grand, permanent building, totally part of the style of its modern European city. But its design is also filled with symbols of an ancient faith. It's just a physical testament to a community wrestling with how to be both traditional and modern at the same time. All right, so let's just recap the whole thing. You've basically got a spectrum. On one end, Reform Judaism sees the Torah as an inspired ethical guide, and individual choice is key. On the other end, Orthodoxy sees it as the direct, unchanging word of God, making the law totally binding. And right there in the middle, you have Conservative Judaism, trying to chart that middle path, seeing the law as both binding and adaptable, a product of a divine-human partnership. And this whole story leaves us with a really profound and universal question, one that goes way beyond this one topic. For any tradition, for any culture, where do you draw the line between evolution and just total reinvention? How much can something change before it becomes something else entirely? It's a question every single culture and faith has to answer for itself.